This person writes and says, I have a fear of being confident at work. In other words, I'm not very confident at work. Today we had a meeting with 6 people for several hours. I felt stressed out and impatient with the discussions. We weren't getting anywhere, just going round and round in circles without getting to any concrete steps toward a solution. I really wanted to say something, but I was afraid to interrupt. I never seemed to find an opening to speak. People say that all the time. Well, there was no opening to speak. Well, everybody else seemed to find an opening. So we're back to fear, which is what you said at the beginning. You said they were constantly interrupting each other and talking over each other. So there's a big lack of confidence here on your part. You already know that, but that's the subject. You're actually forgetting the confidence that I've seen you have when you have felt loved. So we know you can do it. We know you can be unafraid. We know you can be confident. We know you can enter a conversation. You've done it in circumstances with people in real love, people not. You've done it at work. And on this particular meeting, for reasons, who knows, you didn't have breakfast. Something from your past came up because somebody said something like your father used to, or whatever. You forgot all that. So that's the first thing. When we feel loved, confidence is a natural result. We don't worry about interrupting. It's not interrupting. It's entering the conversation. Remember all the people who do love you instead of being distracted by all the people who are talking over each other in the meeting and don't clearly love you. Remember who you are, which is how you feel when you feel loved. And I've seen you feel like yourself. But we forget it. We need to consciously remember those times or they go away. It turns out that almost everything of worth has to be cultivated, remembered, built, tilled, fertilized, whereas the things that aren't productive, like weeds, don't require any attention at all. They grow just fine. So what else can you do in the moment? Remembering who you are is one thing, but sometimes you can't quite get there. Sitting there and not speaking will only make you feel worse, because every time there's a quarter-second delay where nobody's saying anything and you don't say anything, you feel smaller. You feel like you can't. You take it as confirmation of your lack of worth. So what do? We learned this in kindergarten. No kidding. Depending on what country you come from. The very first grade that we entered school. Raise your hand. Just wait. Just look at my face is what matters here. You just raise your hand. Not that anxious, I've got something to say thing, which people are only too eager actually to avoid, because if you look afraid, you're not going to say anything very well or very important. You just raise your hand and you just wait. I've done this many times in my life when people are just yammering at each other. Just raise your hand. If that doesn't work, raise it a little higher and a little more forward. But do it with no impatience, however long it takes. I've had to do it for several minutes on occasion. I'm not going to enter this fray, this conflict of people talking over each other. That's just ridiculous. If I'm going to speak, why bother to speak unless people are listening? So I raise my hand higher. And eventually, somebody will have the, frankly, common sense to call on you Cheryl? Well, now the focus of the entire room is on you instead of you having to fight for it. And if you're fighting while 5 other people are simultaneously fighting for it, you're not going to get a lot of attention. And then in the midst of all of this arguing back and forth, like you said, you said nobody was taking any concrete step toward a solution. And I can't tell you how many meetings I've attended where people have yammered this and blah, blah, blah. And I have finally said, so far, I haven't heard anybody say, why don't we do this? Or even better, this is my favorite thing for people to say in a meeting. I love to say it. I will do this. Would somebody be willing to add to that effort, and perhaps we can start moving forward? So offer a concrete step to make, especially if you're going to make it. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to agree to the step, but I can tell you that you've really got to speak up. Because if you don't, you'll feel small, you'll lose your confidence, you'll be unhappy. That is why. And until a concrete step is offered, we're just blabbing. I never sit still during stupid meetings, and I've been to my share of them. I don't talk a lot, but when I do, I will be heard. Otherwise, there's no sense. I have actually been at meetings where people have sat there yammering over nothing for the longest time, and I've gone to speak, and people have actually looked at me and said, well, obviously annoyed. And I say, well, if you don't want me to speak, there's no sense me being here for the meeting. There's no sense 12 people sitting here and arguing with each other. You don't need me to do that. You could do that with the tree outside. You could all just gather around the tree and yammer at the bark. If I am going to speak, then it's my responsibility to be heard, not insist on being heard. Notice, I'm just casually raising my hand. But why bother unless people are going to hear? And then I offer a real solution. Notice, I didn't say the real solution. I don't raise my hand and go, there's only one way to do this. But that doesn't mean I haven't done that before. But I offer a solution. I don't require that people listen. But I do require that I speak in a way that makes listening easier for them by, like I said, raising my hand and not just entering a big chaos. It's the speaking that matters, not whether everyone listens. It does matter that some people listen, and you will find those people, like, for example, the person who called on you, usually. Eventually, I cut in, and this is back to you talking now. Eventually, I did cut in and suggested some productive steps that we could take. Good for you. But I didn't do it well. I was kind of irritated at that point. It makes sense that when you've waited and tried to get your word in edgewise that you become impatient, but you've got to do something long before then. Like I said, raise your hand, blow up a helium balloon. If you blow up a helium balloon in the middle of a meeting, people will stop talking and ask you what you're doing. I've done that. You lacked the confidence. So you used impatience instead of confidence. They're not the same thing. They're not related at all. Confidence comes from fearlessness. It comes from knowing who you are. Impatience is all about fear. It's imitation power instead of the real thing. With this awareness, now that you know the difference, it's more likely that the next time you will be more confident and you'll speak up sooner. So this time it sounds like you kind of blew your opportunity, but you've learned something. You'll speak up sooner before the impatience. People tend to be annoyed by impatience. You're waiting around for an opportunity to speak. What you were doing was waiting around for somebody in the group to go, Sally, what is your opinion on this subject? I've been around for a lot of years, and that rarely happens. Your waiting only increased your sense of being small, and in order to diminish that, you became angry, which is actually the proper word for impatience. You say, while I was afraid of being interrupted, I spoke with a stressful and loud, trying to convince tone of voice, which I just hate about myself. Well, that's pretty natural that by the time you finally do speak, the resentment has built, and then it leaks out all over the room, which everybody feels. Now you're aware of it. Now you can see that it doesn't work. Now you can see it doesn't make you happy, and it certainly doesn't make you better listened to. Be aware of it, feel loved, grow in your confidence, practice to yourself before your meeting how you're going to speak, how you're going to bring up your subject. You might even, this is just a possible suggestion. I've discovered that if you arrive at a meeting with a written agenda of the things you want to talk about, doesn't matter what anybody else brings to the meeting. You arrive with a written agenda. I've been doing this for a lot of years. Oddly, you're in charge of the meeting. People look at the written agenda and go, oh, so here's what we're going to talk about, even though that's just one thing you want to say, but they tend not to ignore that. You say, now, referring to your paper, and everybody acts like, oh, well, gosh, we've been waiting for your paper. I'm not kidding. They do that. It makes me kind of smile every time I do it. So be aware of it, feel loved, gain in confidence. You can do this because I've seen you do it. You say, when I go there, my heart starts pounding and I go into defensive mode, a mode of I am right. And there's always something to be right about, like the room is incredibly rude for having ignored me for the last 15 minutes. I stutter, I talk fast, I repeat myself, and I don't really know what I'm saying. Not conducive to a coherent message, huh? And the more nervous or irritated or repeating or talking fast or stuttering that you do, the less likely it is you'll be heard the next time. That's why you need to speak up sooner. Well, one of several reasons I mentioned. You continue. I do this because I think that otherwise they won't listen to what I have to say. Turns out it has the opposite effect. They ignore you when you start stammering and not knowing what you're doing. If you want to lose the attention of an audience, stand up in front of a group of people and say, "Oh, I'm just really nervous to be here. I hope you'll all forgive me for being nervous." Well, everybody in the room just left. Why? Because as soon as you say you're nervous, who are you focusing on? You. As opposed to standing up and saying, I have something to say that I think will add significantly to this discussion that will benefit the group. Oh, really? People listen to that because you're caring about them. So you continue. I tend to do all this stuff, but it's probably just a justification. When the truth is that I'm being ungrateful and afraid, like, most of my life. Yes, you're right. The more impatient you become, the weaker you look, and the less people listen. How ironic. The harder we try, the less people care. Have real confidence versus patience. And I care about you. Remember that. I've seen you do this. Keep going. Second email. You say, actually, I considered raising my hand at the meeting. You're responding to what I said in the first email. But I didn't do it because the people at the table seemed too knowledgeable and experienced compared to me. Oh, who cares? You have some idea they haven't thought of. You do, or some different way of expressing it. You have something to bring. And if you don't believe that you have something to bring, what are you doing at the meeting? They clearly invited you because you had something. You continue. Well, it doesn't change the fact that I wasn't confident or feeling worthwhile enough to have an opinion. Anyway, I've raised my hand like you've described 2 times before at work, and my experience is that the moment I raise my hand, the person talking feels interrupted just by my raising my hand, and then hurries to finish the sentence. Their sentence. Well, who cares? What's the alternative? Sit there like a mute? Because if you sit there like a mute during the meeting, they assume that you're also not a really intelligent mute. They're all interrupting each other anyway, verbally. And if the person hurries to finish their sentence, what's the harm? They got to finish it. You didn't stop them. You're the one waiting to be acknowledged, and then you're in a position to speak without being in a hurry, and you don't want to. You want to get the attention of a room. I've spoken at hundreds of meetings. Nah, more than that. And I've learned that the more slowly you speak and with the greater confidence, like I'm doing right now, the more people listen. In fact, occasionally I'll be in the middle of a seminar or whatever that I'm doing, and I've forgotten where I am. I don't even remember what was the last sentence. The very best solution isn't to speak faster. It's not to apologize, in which case you lose the whole room because they figure you're a fool. It's to slowly say, hang on a second. Let me continue from that last thought. It gives you a minute to find out what the last thought is. If you can't remember what the last thought is, well, I'd start from somewhere. If somebody attempts to interrupt you, like you said, people are talking over each other, you immediately, you can't wait for more than a second and a half. I'm not kidding, you have timed this. If somebody goes to interrupt you and you let them get a sentence going, you're done. They will interrupt you. But if you stop them in a second and go like this, because see, they already know they're being rude. It doesn't look like it because everybody's doing it, but they know. You immediately raise your hand in the gesture that everybody recognizes means stop. And you say, hang on just for a second. It's my turn to speak. You can speak in about 2 minutes. Well, how gentle. And you use my tone. Confident, gentle, not rude, and they know how long they have to wait. Well, how thoughtful are you? You conclude. Sometimes he or she who's talking or possibly interrupting me stops talking out of fear if I raise my hand and gives me the opportunity to speak. That doesn't feel good either, but I guess that's not my problem. No, it's not. You're simply going, I would like to speak. If they don't have the courage to finish their sentence, that's not your job. Just as it's not their job to give you the courage to start your sentence. Your confidence is the problem. I've told uncounted public speakers, if there's one thing people pay attention to more than anything else, it's not your competence. It usually takes a while in a talk to establish that. It's your confidence. You stand up and you speak with utter confidence. Everybody stops talking because they figure you know what you're talking about. And if you're not faking it and you're speaking confidently, you do. Your confidence is the problem, or better said, your confidence is your choice. Their fears are not your problem. Speak up sooner, without patience, clearly, and as you practice doing this, your confidence will grow. And you're going to make a bigger contribution to the group, to the company, and to, most importantly in this case, you. New subject. This is kind of a follow-on from the subject we just talked about a little bit. Confidence and fear must be opposites. Yeah? The opposite of fear is actually faith or trust. Faith in love. Feeling loved by people who understand you leads to knowing and feeling who you are, yourself, which connects you to everything and everybody. You realize that you are part of eternity and the entire universe. With that knowledge and peace that you're part of everything, which is, by the way, fact, you can take risks, make mistakes. You're still part of everything. You just made a mistake. You can learn from them. You can grow. And the making of mistakes and the learning, that's what leads to confidence. So, faith leads to action, and repeated action and learning lead to confidence. It's not more complicated than that. So if you don't speak up, you're not going to complete that series. Next subject. This is from a woman who's been practicing real love for a while, who has learned recently that she talks too much. It's a little astonishing that it took her this long to realize that, but she does. I told her this while her husband was in the room. I said, honey, you use way too many words. And his face lit up like sunrise. It was pretty clear that he's been wanting to say that for, 20 years and never had the guts to do it. He beamed with the feeling of being understood and nodded his head vigorously like he was a bobble-headed doll. She writes this: I'm working on using fewer words and realizing that one reason I use too many is fear. That's almost universally the reason. Another reason is needing the attention. And I'm probably trying to be right. Yes, to all three. But some is that I don't know how to use fewer words. This is really well said, so let's go over it. Some of it is fear. Yes. When we speak with a lot of words, words protect us. For one thing, while I'm babbling at you in a conversation, and some people I'm pretty sure can speak while they're breathing in, they never stop. While I'm using words and dominating a conversation, you can't hurt me. So there's an element of safety in there, decreases my fear. Also, if you're constantly talking, it's hard for them to speak at all. So what do? If you feel the least bit uneasy as you talk, the least bit uneasy. I didn't say angry, afraid, impatient. No, just less than ease. You're protecting yourself. You said that words get you attention. Yeah. And more generally, they just get you what you want. How many times have people said to me, my husband agreed. We made this plan and my husband agreed. I don't do this anymore because I know the sound of this sentence. It has a sound. My husband and I talked and we agreed. Now, that really sounds innocent, but there's a slight tone of urgency to it. So just for kicks in the old days, I used to call the husband and I would say, so you and Susie talked about this. Did you agree to this plan? And then there's this pause, a pause for, a second and a half will do. And I say, so you didn't really agree. You were just beaten into submission with words. Well, how did you know that? Because that's what happens all over the place. The more words you use, people just eventually give you what you want to get you to shut up. No kidding. Words are like an assault. They're like machine gun bullets. You can do something about this. If you feel in the slightest that you are trying to convince somebody of something, instead of just simply stating an option or simply stating an opinion, or to justify yourself, you're already well into the condition of too many words, like, 500 words ago. You're already doing it. You continue. I've asked you in the past how I could have said whatever, this or that, with fewer words, and you have graciously shown me how to do that. In fact, on a great many occasions, people have spoken for several minutes, and since I have considerable experience with writing and how much time equates to how much of a page, and how much of a page is how many minutes, sometimes I'll just stop people and say, so far you've been speaking for about 450 words. Let me try to put everything that you're saying into one sentence. And they look at me like, impossible. So I summarize it in one sentence, and then I ask them, did I miss anything important? No. Well, that's called talking too much. Because when you use that many words, people get lost in your words. By the end, they don't know what you were talking about. If people use enough words, by the end, I don't know what they're talking about either. You continue. So you have done that for me, shown me how to speak with fewer words. I can see it, but I don't have the skill to repeat it. Practice, just like everything else. You may never have that skill as much as you'd like. You may never be able to be as brief as somebody else. So what? Just be aware of your use of words. Listen to the people around you. Listen to the people who do speak briefly and how they get the attention of people by just going, what if we did this? Which takes 9 words. I'm filling in the sentence, obviously, as opposed to you who just used 900 words and nobody heard a word of it. Listen and practice. Now, you actually ask here, what could I do to work on using fewer words? Pay attention to the motivations I listed and the feelings. And sometimes, occasionally, it'll make you feel a little self-conscious in the beginning, but you'll get over it. These days, I assume every conversation I have on the phone with somebody, every Skype conversation I have, everything I write, people record it. They pass it around to other people, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not. We get recorded all the time. I mean, you can't call a service person for your computer without hearing this message will be recorded for quality control or whatever. Record yourself. I must admit to gross ignorance using my cell phone, but everybody carries their cell phone on them. Put it in your pocket and just click it on record and just leave it there. And then after an hour or so, listen to it. Really, not kidding, this will really help you. Then if you really want to learn something from it, transcribe it. No kidding. Write down what you said. And then edit it to see how you can say what you really wanted to say with the fewest possible words. You will be astonished. Or have somebody else edit it. Every once in a while, people send me things they've written to a relative or for a paper, for an application, for a job resume. I've edited more pieces of paper than you could imagine. On average, I use 5 to 10% of the words that most people use. Not kidding. Now, you hear a lot of words from me here on video chats because, well, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. 5 to 10% of the words will get the message across. Now, listen to the next word. Better. It gets the message across better than all those words. On one occasion, I got sent 500 words that somebody was going to send to their sister. And I edited it to 12, not 1,200, 12 words out of 500. That's like 2.4% of the original work. And again, I asked if I left out anything that really matters. No. Well, that would be 488 words that would cause nothing but confusion and distraction. So try that. We almost all use too many. They keep us isolated. They protect us. They manipulate, and we get lost. Example. What we want is to be really connected to other people. That's what we want. That's the purpose for words. Unless, of course, I'm at Lowe's and I say, where are the 2x4s? Okay, so that's less for connection than it is for me to learn where the 2x4s are. But on the whole, we want to be connected to people. That's why we speak. We use so many details that people think our talking is about the details, because it turns out it is, when that's not what we really want. We blow it right from the beginning by talking too much. So we go on and on about work when what we really need to say is, I don't feel very confident about myself. And at work, that results in people not listening to me. They use me. I feel small, and it confirms my lack of confidence. Wow, that's brief. And yet it says, well, everything about you. And that was, well, I don't know how many words, 20, something like that. The more we talk, and then he did this, and then he did that, and then the floor sweeper came by. His name is Fred, by the way, and his wife isn't feeling really well. And we all talk like that. At the end, what's the subject? No, we wanted to get across the message that at work we don't feel confident, we need help about it. Then just say that with no amplification. Oh, if you'll practice doing this, people will tend to listen. No kidding. I've actually been in meetings, and because I don't use a lot of words, I have heard whoever's leading the meeting on many occasions turn to me and say, almost begging, Greg, do you have anything to say? In other words, is there any way in this world you could boil this down to just a few words, because I'm going nuts? It's fun. It's brief. It's connecting. It's powerful. It's confident. It's very cool. Next subject. I was Skyping somebody who was having difficulty with turning on their camera, which is oddly common. You'd think after using Skype enough times we would know how to do that, but it's just a common problem. So that I could see them. And one of the things they did was they accidentally, what people do when they panic on electronic things is hit every button on the screen, which usually ends up in some kind of explosion, but we panic and we hit buttons. So they took a snapshot of me, which captured me exactly. Now remember, they didn't have their camera on. I think they could see me, but they took a snapshot and they took it exactly as I was scratching my nose, because they were piddling around. They weren't even talking. They were trying to set everything up. And it looked just like I had my finger buried in my nose to my knuckle. It was less than distinguished, the snapshot. You wouldn't put it on your Facebook page. In that moment, it looked pretty foolish. And I got a kick out of that. And so do all of us look foolish if we're captured in particular moments. We all do. We get afraid. We respond with anger, manipulation, defending ourselves, criticism, selfishness, whatever. And in those moments, we look emotionally speaking, like we have our finger buried up our nose. It looks that stupid. Whatever. What's the solution? I saw the snapshot and just went, well, that looks pretty ridiculous, and just continued. I didn't mention it. I didn't anything. We can stick our fingers up our noses permanently, which makes it difficult to use our hands and looks ridiculous. Or we can suffer in shame about looking bad. Or we can just get over it. We're all going to do stuff like this. Everybody's had a snapshot taken of them in a group photo where later they go, oh my goodness, this is going to be the picture that goes around the world and represents me, which is apparently why we have ways of altering photographs digitally. You just get over it and you learn to enjoy the overall ride, the embarrassing snapshots included. Physical snapshots and emotional ones. New subject. On many occasions, in these video chats, we've talked about the pause. What am I doing? What do I want to do? What can I do? Remember, we've talked about that when we start to get emotionally excited, in other words, when we get hypervigilant, when we're sliding into PTSD, we pause and ask these questions. What am I doing now? I'm clearly reacting to some event in the past because my reaction is out of proportion to whatever just happened. Some guy cut me off and I explode in rage and scream and honk the horn at him. That would be called a disproportionate reaction. Then we ask, so what do I want to do? How do I want to behave? And it turns out that I would like to behave in an ideally loving way, but that's not always possible. Hence the third question, what can I do? I mean, what I would like to do is to pull the guy over to the side of the road and go, can you believe what a horse's behind I am? I was wrong to do that. I apologize. It was really foolish and it had nothing to do. Yeah, well, after you've gestured at a guy and honked your horn, it's not likely that he's going to pull over to the side of the road for you. But what can I do? Well, that's a different thing. I have made stupid mistakes, for example, like signaling left and turning right or whatever, and the car behind honks at me. Rather than being irritated, I just lower my head a little bit and wave to him like, what an idiot, meaning what an idiot I just was. Everybody understands that gesture. It's a way of apologizing, saying, my bad. I say all this because I talked to a woman who told me that she decided simply to do this, to do the pause. She said something to her husband that she did not intend as a criticism, but he took it as one. That's called a trigger. It's something that comes from the past. If you say some innocent thing to somebody and they take it as a criticism and become all rigid and their face becomes flushed, you've triggered their past. By definition, you have. Her husband then defended himself. Once we get triggered, we just go wild. I mean, why be crazy for a second? I mean, let's go crazy for several minutes, or in some cases, several years. He defended himself by saying something critical or unkind or whatever, and she paused. She said, I'll be back in a bit to finish our conversation. That's just genius. She was feeling afraid. He had attacked her or defended himself or whatever. She didn't quite know what was going on. If she had responded right then in the second, she would have defended herself against his defense, and then we would have had the usual storm of worthlessness. So she paused. I'll be back in a second. She went into the next room. She explained herself that she was going to be back in a second. He wasn't offended by that. In fact, he was relieved not to continue a conversation that was going badly. 15 minutes later, she returned. She touched him. If I remember, she called somebody, but that doesn't really matter. You can do this by yourself or you can call somebody. She described how she had been empty and triggered, and that it wasn't about him, that it just touched some familiarity to something in the past that was painful. He immediately softened and described his own overreaction. The conflict was over. I know these two. This conflict would have gone back and forth with, well, you did this and then you did that. Oh, yeah, and you do it more. No, I'm pretty sure you do it more. You do it. In fact, you do it all the time. You do it while you're asleep. You do it in your dreams. It just would have gone on all the rest of the day. I know, because I've seen him do it. All she did, she stopped it all by pausing and asking, what am I doing? What do I want to do? What can I do? And she did it, and it was over. Sounds almost magical, too good to be true. Not magic, it's miraculous, and it's not too good to be true. New subject. I talked recently to a woman whose life had been one long series of disasters. Pain, lies, reaction to pain, addictions, on and on. So she began the process of finding, feeling, and sharing love. A year later, literally, she's unrecognizable. People stop her and go, what happened to you? And they don't know what to make of it, so they say silly things like, so did you change your hair? Did you lose some weight? She looks different, but we have to explain it in some physically concrete way. And she was saying that she could hardly believe the change in herself. And I said, you're kidding. The laws of happiness are predictable. They're as immutable as the law of gravity. If we follow them, we will find happiness. It works. Faith. She chose to believe in true principles and in love instead of old lies. Doing. We've been talking about this all along, here and there. Now we're just kind of distilling it into one brief interaction. Action. She did what was required to find and share real love. Faith without action is nothing. Saying, oh yeah, I believe that, and then doing nothing about it, waste of time. It's just a self-deception. Learning. She learned from succeeding in her actions to try to apply the principle she was learning. She learned from failing. She learned competence. She learned ways that worked. She learned ways that didn't work. She learned that when she failed and fell on her face, which is sometimes actually the best way to learn, she learned that she could recover. She learned she didn't die. She learned the limitations of her skills at that point, and she learned never to quit. Failing is nothing. People say to me, well, I tried what you said and I failed. And I go, cool, how do you feel? Just by saying, cool, how do you feel? People calm down and realize, well, I actually feel pretty good. I failed and I didn't die. It's a miracle that this woman's life has changed. She is a miracle. And we can all experience miracles like that. We just need to keep moving. Although it's a miracle, it's not a surprise because the laws of happiness are predictable. New subject. I know a woman who finally had the courage to quit a job where she was being used and mistreated. It was pretty terrible. She played her part in it, but her associates and her boss were, well, impossible. And she also quit associating with her family because her family was even more impossible and had a far worse effect on her than her job. In fact, the whole reason she got a job where there were abusive people is because she was familiar with being abused. She wrote, she said, "I'm terrified of finding a job." Well, how many people have said that? Like, duh. Finding a job involves so many rejections. In fact, I refer to a job hunt as institutionalized rejection. Don't resist the rejections. Don't fear them. Waste of time. Everybody does because they're afraid of rejection. And I get why, because we take it as an indication of our worth. Welcome the rejections. Fear has become a habit for you. A successful life is one long series of exercising faith, taking action, learning, and repeating, even when we fail or are rejected. Standing up again, in other words, exercising faith, when we're gliding along and succeeding, it's still faith, but so what? Who can't do that? Standing up and trying again when you've fallen down and smashed your face on the concrete pavement, yeah, that takes some guts and faith and courage. Fear eliminates faith. Fear's not a step. As we're applying for a job, we can't afford fear. Stops everything. Keeps us from being articulate. It keeps us from being who we are. It keeps us from taking the next step. Just stops everything. I'm afraid to apply for a job. Well, then you're going to do a lousy job of it. No, I'm looking forward to looking for a job. I'm looking forward to finding the match. I know that most of the jobs I apply for won't be a match because they're not looking for somebody who's like me, but somebody is. It's like people who date. I'm afraid to date because I'm going to be rejected. I hope so. Because everybody's different. It would be kind of weird if every single person accepted you. We can plan on being rejected by people who don't appreciate who we are. But if we're afraid, it's self-fulfilling. You can't afford to indulge in fear. So what do? Let's assume, just for kicks, we're making this up, that you're going to be looking on the internet, wherever. You're going to at least scan 2,000 jobs. And that's not uncommon. You're going to send out 200 resumes, 1 in 10. It's a rough average, depends on the job, how experienced you are. And out of the 200 resumes that you send out, you'll get 20 interviews. So you started with 2,000 and you're down to 20 interviews. Don't dread them, all of these looking at the jobs, the resumes, the interviews. They're part of getting the job. I commonly tell people that looking for a job is a job. Just do the dang job. Fear's not a step. You can fear these steps and do them slowly, hesitantly, and poorly, which is a little stupid, or you just move through them. How? Instead of fearing rejection, remember that you're not trying to get a particular job. I really hope I get this job. How do you know? You're selling you. You're finding out who appreciates what you have, your skills, your abilities, your boldness, your confidence, your ability to keep books, whatever. They can't find that out if you're afraid. If you're afraid, all they see is this frightened applicant and they go, Dang, afraid. You write afraid across your application in red and throw it away. Be you with your assets, your flaws, everything. Be prepared to talk about your flaws. I'm really good at this and this and this and this, and I really hate creating Excel sheets, but I'm working on it. Whatever it is. If people don't appreciate what you have, your skill set, who you are, you wouldn't want to work for them anyway, would you? Because it would be endless disappointment for you and for them. How do I know? Look at what happened with your last job, where you were selling you plus your fear turned into a disaster. Your boss ended up being abusive, just exactly like your mother and your aunt and your sister and every other person that you've known, because you sold your fear. And they went, oh man, I really like to, not consciously, but there are people who hire people who are afraid just so they can control them. You got used and mistreated because you applied with fear. Establish who you are, and then a job application is just gathering information and seeing if you like the job and seeing if they like the assets you bring. It is not a trial of your worth. That's got to be really clear, or we really screw it up. And this is true in everything, in dating, in relationships, in everything. All we can do, the only thing that makes any sense at all, is to learn who we are, to practice, to make mistakes, to fall down, to exercise. How many times have we talked about this? Exercise faith, practice, gather information, learn, and repeat. If we do that, eventually we develop confidence, which simply means that we're able to better present who we are. Now we get a better match between ourselves and other people, ourselves and the job, ourselves and everything. But it starts with being confident in who you are. And we've been talking about that the entire chat. We'll see you in a week.